Okay. Are we live?
We are live.
Oh, very good, very good. Hey everybody, how you doing today? It's Ken Haydrick, which some of you probably know me, but if you don't, I'm the Dean of the Pie Academy, which is a great online community of pie bakers who love both sweet and savory pies, as well as just about everything else. We love to cook. We cook all kinds of things in our Sunday classes. But anyway, I wanted to welcome you to this free workshop on building the perfect apple pie. And I was being a little bit coy when I named it the perfect apple pie because I want you to understand that there is no the perfect apple pie. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how you can make your perfect apple pie. And because there's all kinds of different variables. There's well, first of all, there's a type of apple. We'll get into that a little bit. Other things, other fruit you might put in the pie. I mean, that's another variable. What you put in for what size, even what size pie pan you use, what spices you use, whether you use a top crust or a crumb topping like we're going to do today. Yeah, we're not going to do I love both kinds of pies, but today we're going to stick with the crumb topping type pie. So there are all kinds of variations, and we'll talk about those as we go. But the idea is I want you to understand that there is no the perfect pie. I mean, there's 100 ways you can spin it. This is one of the first pie books I wrote years ago. It's called Apple Pie Perfect, and it was 100 different ways to spin an apple pie recipe. So I know as well as anybody how many different ways you can do it. I'm glad you all showed up today. I'm sure we have folks there from all different parts of the country, which is what I love. We often have people tuning in from Canada too. So welcome. There's one person I want to introduce, and that is my wife Bev. She's sitting over in the computer station, and she controls the cameras. And whenever you get a message that comes across in the chat that says it's me, it's not really, it's her. So let's show folks what we'll be doing, the different camera angles today. So we have this when I want to stop and tell you something, but we also have an overhead shot too, which is where we're going to be in just a minute when we start mixing. And then we have this little front-facing camera right here. Hey, there. And that's what we use for close-ups when we're cutting pie. And if there's, like later on when I'm showing you how to make the edge of the crust and make flutes and things like that, we use that camera. So those are the things we do. So my wife is, her name is Bev, but I call her Sweetie. So as we go through today's class, if I start saying Sweetie, you'll know who it is.
Or you just call everyone Sweetie, don't you?
Yeah. She says, Bev says I just call everybody Sweetie, which is not true. I save that for her. So the crust we're going to use today is a crust that I've been using a long time. It's a food processor pie pastry, and I know a lot of you have questions about using the food processor. I think even though food processors have been around for most of my adult cooking life, I think they were introduced in the country in about 1972 or 3. I think a lot of people are still old school when it comes to making pastry. I like to make pastry by hand too, but I prefer using the food processor. So that's the first thing we're going to do today, and let's just jump into that, okay? So I'll move this guy right here is what I'm going to cut into in just a little bit. This is our apple pie. This is what it's going to look like when you're all done making yours if you like a crumb topping. So we'll cut that before we're done. So if you haven't already, while I'm talking about pie and making pie crust, introduce yourself in the chat there and let us all know where you're from. We always like to know where people are tuning in from. Let me grab my ingredients here. Got some nice cold butter. I like to refrigerate my ingredients before I get started. Everything mixes up so nicely when your ingredients are chilled, and they get nice and flaky that way. So we've got our flour here, and somewhere in that handout, that big handout that I made available in those links, you have a recipe for a pie pastry. So we're going to be following the single crust pie pastry recipe, and that calls for 1 1/3 cups of all-purpose flour, which is going to go right there, and it also calls for 1/2 teaspoon of salt and about 1 teaspoon or 1.5 teaspoons of cornstarch. That cornstarch, the salt is there because pastry and baked things taste flat without it. And the cornstarch adds a little bit of tenderness. Did I go the right way with that?
Mm-hmm.
Bev gives me a lot of hand signals that I have to interpret. So she was pushing her hands one way or another. Okay, so I just put the dry ingredients in there, and I give it a little bit of a couple of buzzes to mix it all up. Now this is our 9 tablespoons of unsalted butter here. And again, I had both of these things in the refrigerator. Things mix up so much nicer when they're, at least in this particular recipe, they do when it's good and cold. So then we put the lid back on, and we're going to pulse it. I always push down. I always tend to push down on the top of this thing, only because it does have a tendency for the flour to fly out a little bit. But I don't want to. I have to remind myself not to do that during classes because I want people to be able to see in there. So we're going to give it about 6 pulses. What we're doing, we're trying to end up with little, you've made enough pastry probably to know they often call for pea-sized pieces of fat and butter. So that's what you're shooting for, pieces about like that. And then, so that, a little smaller, a little bigger, but that's kind of what you're looking for. That was about 6 pulses there.
And how many cups is that food processor?
Oh, this is, by the way, well, I'll get to talking about this. I love this food processor. This is my newest one. This is a 14-cup one. I do have the link on that link page that I sent you. And I tell you, I've had a lot of food processors over the year. None of them come close to this one. I love this one. We're going to give that one more pulse. Now, here's a little tip. I love this. The thing about food processors, and I know this because I've cut myself on blades a lot, you don't want to stick your fingers down in there any more than necessary. So I use this thing here. It's a little silicone spurtle, they call these. And I do that, I use it just to loosen it up a little bit in case it started compacting in the food processor. And the nice thing about this coating, silicone, is you're not going to damage the blade. You're not going to dull the blade. So let me get the water that I need. And I'm going to add just a drop of, about 1 teaspoon of vinegar in this too. Here's my little cup I was looking for. So we're going to...
Double the recipe with the 14-cup food processor?
Excuse me?
Can you double?
Yes, you can. You can make it. You can use this food processor for the double batch that I have there. Good question. Yeah, this is a wonderful, wonderful food processor. It's quiet too. All my other food processors make such a racket, but this one, it sounds like one of those hybrid cars. You don't know if they're coming down the road or not. I'm just going to give this about 1 teaspoon of vinegar. So I've pulsed. So just to recap, dry ingredients, buzz, and then we added the cold butter, 9 tablespoons of cold butter, and we pulsed the machine about 6 times. Now this is all the liquid, all at once. And we get our lid back on. that's what we want to do. We want to end up with a mixture that looks like this. Now, a lot of times you'll see recipes that say, pulse the machine until it balls up around the food processor. But we don't want to do that. We don't want it balling up around the blade. Okay, we want things to stay separate like this, but we want it to look like there's not a whole lot of powdery dry stuff in here, and there's not. This is perfect. This is just what you want it to look like, granular, okay? Now I'm going to put this aside and put this guy. Excuse me?
How much water was that?
That was a 1/4 cup of water, cold water, plus a teaspoon and a half of white vinegar. It should be right in your recipe, so if you don't, maybe if you haven't printed out your recipe, you could print those recipes out so you have them handy. Now let me just shake this off. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put down, this is my trick for shaping the dough. I call this the gather and compress method. Now you don't need, I have the big industrial size plastic wrap here, which you definitely do not need to get. But I do this so much and I use so much plastic wrap that I buy these big rolls. I think this is 3,000 square feet or something. Takes me about a year to go through it. Weighs a ton. Okay, so basically what we did there, we want to create a nice big target for all that granular stuff. So watch what I do. That's 3 overlapping pieces. Here's our stuff. Okay. And there you go.
And what's the purpose for the vinegar again?
The vinegar helps, that's a good question, whoever asked that. The vinegar helps to tenderize the pastry just a little bit. It's anything acidic like that when you're baking. You've seen it with buttermilk and yogurt and things like that when they're used in baking. Those acidic things tend to tenderize. And the same with the vinegar in the pie pastry. So watch what I'm doing here. I'm taking the sides of this and I'm bringing it towards the center, bringing my knuckles almost together, and I'm pressing down a little bit, okay? And I keep doing this. I work my way around 4 or 5 or 6 times until I end up with a nice disc like this. I call this the gather and compress method. And the reason I like it, it's especially nice if you're a beginning pie maker, because it keeps, you know how it is when if you haven't done something before, and pie just seems to be one of those things that intimidates the bejesus out of people. And what happens when you're intimidated or scared, your hands get warm and you start handling the dough, and before you know it, your butter is melting and your results are going to be compromised. So this is a way to handle the dough without really handling it. So after I get that, so that's our dough disc, and I usually like to refrigerate that for, I don't know, at least a half hour, and preferably longer than that, maybe an hour. In fact, I've got one in the fridge that we're going to roll in just a minute, so I better take it out. Excuse me for 1 second. So here's one that was in the fridge. So then what I like to do, I just like to give this one a few little rolls and flatten it out a little bit. That way, if you flatten it out a little bit more, it will chill quicker. That chilling helps to keep all these, see all these little flecks in there? Can you see those in the camera, sweetie? See all those little flecks? Those things, those little flecks, the water in the butter in those little flecks creates steam, and when that steam pushes out, it creates little flakes, and that happens best when your dough is good and cold. So that's all we do. That's how we make our little dough disc. Then that goes right in the refrigerator. Okay? Any questions about that? I'll take a couple of questions as we go. Sweetie, if you have a question there.
Someone says that they, since it's so hot here in Texas, that they use a chilled pie scraper to help shape.
Oh, that's interesting. And down in Texas, Bev was telling me, a chilled pie scraper. Oh, that's a great idea. I assume by pie scraper that our Texas friend is talking about one of these. Is that correct? Our Texas friend can let us know. But yeah, I can see how that would make sense. That metal would trap the cold, would hold that cold for a little bit, and it would make it just a little bit easier. So that's good.
And how many inches do you roll it out?
Well, we're getting there. Whoever asked about how big we roll it out, we're going to do that in just a second.
Okay.
So we made the dough. That was pretty easy. And now let's roll the dough out. Now I have this other one, like I said, that I made earlier. It was in the fridge. And keep that in mind. If you have refrigerated your dough, like this guy here, that you do want to usually take it out of the fridge, maybe at least 5, but maybe 10 or 12 minutes before you start rolling it. Otherwise, it's going to fight you. It's going to fight you a little bit too much, and you don't want that. You want it to behave. You want it to be cooperative. So we'll let that sit for just another minute while we talk about our pan. Oh, Bev is raising her hand. I think we have a question.
Yes. So Roseanne wants to know, what if she added some shortening instead of just butter?
Oh, good question. Roseanne is asking about shortening, adding some shortening and butter. And I do that all the time. See, especially, and if you're interested in doing that, the shortening is a great addition. I don't usually make an all shortening crust, and I know because I hear from people all the time, a all shortening crust is very difficult for most people to handle. So, but if you add a little bit of shortening to your pie dough, it can add a lot of tenderness. It's real, I call it like a muscle relaxer for your dough. So, and even a small amount. So what you could do with that recipe that we just made, take that extra tablespoon of butter, above a stick. So that recipe calls for 9 tablespoons of butter. Use 8 tablespoons. Use 1 stick, and then for that last tablespoon, use Crisco, vegetable shortening, and see how that works for you. If you like that, you like the tenderness, you like what it does to your crust, next time use 7 tablespoons of butter and 2 tablespoons of Crisco. Just play around with it a little bit. Don't be afraid to play around with things.
Oh, okay. Now, so Sue says that she meant how big is the disc?
How big? Oh, the
Yes.
Oh, okay. Not how big to roll it, but how big
Right.
is the disc? Well, here's one right here, and I'd say by looking at it, it's probably about 6 to 7 inches. You got 6 inches right there, so that's good. Again, and the reason sometimes you don't see that. You watch recipes or on YouTube, people doing doughs. Sometimes they just form it into like this big land mass. It looks like an iceberg, and they just wrap it up and everything. But it's so hard to work with something like that when you take it out of the fridge that I just like to sort of pre-shape it, I guess is what you would call this. Okay, so there's the dough I made ahead of time, the same dough I just made. And here's our pan. Let's talk about this pan for a second. I apologize for this pan, but you know, me and this pan go back, as you can probably tell, and I have abused it. I have cut in here with knives I had no business using, but you know what? That's just what happens with your pans. You love them. Sometimes you love them to death. But this is made by USA Pan, which is my #1 pan people. I love their pans. I love all their baking goods, all their baking equipment. But this happens to be the one that they make for Williams-Sonoma. It's a line of pie pans called Gold Touch. And you can find them next time you're in there. You can shop online. Frankly, I don't know that they're worth the extra money, because their regular USA Pan ones are usually about 1/3 cheaper. They're not this proprietary. They don't have this proprietary gold finish on them, but I think the product is just as good, if not better. Now let me show you one of their other pans that we're going to be using here in just a minute. Well, you know what? Rather than pull it out now because it's wrapped up, I'll show you their other pan in just a minute. This way we can just move on. But anyway, this pan, I call it a 9.5-inch deep dish pie pan. What it is, it's about 1.5 inches deep, which is sort of the minimum for a deep dish pan, because I have plenty that are deeper. I have some that are 2 inches, and it measures about 9.5 inches across. Usually with pans and pie pans, when you measure from inside to outside, 9.5, that's usually how they're measured, okay? Now, one thing I like about this pan and the other one that I'm going to show you in a little bit, it has this rim on it. That's very important with a pie pan because it gives you a place to rest your edge after you roll it out and get it in the pan. So keep that in mind, that any pan that you buy, henceforth, make sure it's got a rim here, and we'll demonstrate that in a minute. So let's get this thing rolling, okay? I'll put this aside. Now, I told you that I would be talking about various tools that are popular, not just with me, but other members of the Pie Academy and our regulars who come to a lot of our Sunday classes. And this guy right here is one of them. Everybody loves this. In fact, we've done a number of pie getaways over the years where we either go to Charleston or Vermont or Savannah, someplace like that, and Pie Academy members come from all over the country. And we have all this nice equipment and everything, you know, bowls and pie plates and all this stuff. This is the thing, this little $5 thing is the thing that everybody wants to go home with. I mean, it's so funny. But this is the most useful little item. It's got a screen top. It's made out of plastic. I think on the link page I gave you a link for it, but I use this every day. So let's put him aside. So let's get rolling here. So this is my Pie Academy rolling pin. This is what we call a French style pin, a little thicker in the middle than it is on the ends. And that thickness in the middle, it really comes in handy, because one of the things that thickness does is it allows you to move dough around. Say I see here so let's just say here there's kind of a flat edge, and I want to sort of steer that dough and, you know, make it nice and round there. Well, very easy. Look at that, just rounded right out. If you've got this extra girth in the middle, it makes it easy to maneuver your dough and shape it. By the way, you're all there watching on YouTube. I'd appreciate it if you're not already a subscriber to our YouTube channel, if you would just subscribe, hit that subscribe button. And if you don't mind also, if you want, you can push that notifications bell too, and that way when I put up new material, new videos on YouTube, you'll be notified that material, that the videos are up there. So thanks for doing that. I appreciate that. So with this pan, it's good to have a working knowledge of your pans and the size dough, the size circle you need for that particular pan. For instance, I have 3 or 4 of these, and I know that for this pan, I need a 12.5-inch circle. So I'm always sort of aiming towards that 12.5 mark. I can tell you right now I'm pretty close. We get a lot of compliments on these rolling pins. We have a company up in Vermont that makes these just for us and to our specifications. And we get a lot of people saying how much they love these. They love the control that they have. They love the natural wood. So we sell a lot of these right at the holiday.
You know, that comes in maple and...
Yeah, it comes in maple and cherry. It's a beautiful, the cherry one is beautiful. This is actually maple. Okay, so I'm guessing, because I've made this so many times, that we have about 12 inches here. Look at that. Oh, I am good. So we have 12 inches. So we need to go another ½ inch.
Now Tracy wants to know, do you prefer metal pans as opposed to ceramic?
Well, it depends. Day-to-day, for my day-to-day pies, I like metal because I think metal pans do a better job of browning the crust. So this USA pan is like my go-to everyday pan. However, you know, sometimes it's not fancy enough. You get invited to, you know, potluck or Thanksgiving, and you want something a little showier. And in that case, there's a, you know, I tend to go with my ceramic pans. And I like ceramic, but I don't think it does quite as good a job of browning the crust. Everyone's got their own opinion about that, but that's just the way I feel about it. But there's some beautiful ones out there. La Creuset makes some nice ones. Who's the other one that I like so much? Oh, someone will think it for me in just a minute. The other company that makes those ceramic pans that I love so much. Oh shoot, the name escapes me. Oh, Emile Henry or Emile Henry, whichever. But they make beautiful bakeware too. I really like their stuff. Okay, so we've got 12.5 inches. Now you notice as I've been rolling, I've been maneuvering the dough the whole time. That way, you know, every 2 or 3 strokes of my rolling pin there, I've been moving the dough, so that way it more or less assures that I'm not sticking. And you do that whether you're rolling directly on, I like to roll on parchment. I have parchment with a mat, a baking mat underneath it, but whether you're rolling on wood or marble or any other material, I recommend doing the same thing. It just, you know, it keeps your pie crust honest. So then you don't go to lift it off and find that it's laminated to the table. Okay. So if your dough is behaving, you should be able to fold it in half like that. And then to put that center mark in the center of your pan, and then you can unfold it just like that. Now, before you press it in too much, you know, like you don't just drop it in there and then just, you know, press it in. Well, first thing you want to do is sort of go around and check the overhang. You want, you know, kind of an even overhang all around, because you don't want to have, you know, a ton in one area and too little in another. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just sort of adjusting it. Now I can see, you know, I can see from the crease here, and I can tell by running my finger under here that I have it pretty much centered. I have a little bit extra overhang there. But now what you want to do is you want to get this in the pan, and you do that by lifting lifting, so you're not stretching, first you lift and sort of scooch it down the sides like that. So you lift because that takes the tension off the dough, so you don't stretch it. Okay, so it's in there nice. You can see, you want to be able to see that crease, you know, in the bottom. And before we turn it up, before we go any further, let me just trim that a little bit there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this edge under, and I'm going to shape it into an upstanding ridge, okay? So, and what I'll do is I'll have Bev go to the front-facing camera for a lot of that, because I want you to see what it looks like from the front. So I'm sort of tucking it way under, I'm pinching it together, and then I'm resting it right on that rim we were talking about a minute ago. So here I go.
Roseanne saw that you didn't grease the pan.
Oh yeah, with this much fat in there, don't need any grease in the pan. So I'm pinching it together, and then I'm sort of pushing it down onto that rim. Can you see that good in the front? Are you on the front camera, sweetie? Mm-hmm. Okay. And occasionally, like right there, I'd noticed there was a little bit less dough than there was in some of these other thicker areas. That's fine, don't worry about that. But it's important, really tuck it under there, really tuck it under, okay? Because you don't want that coming unfurled. Now, we use a unbaked, or just a raw, uncooked pie pastry for this pan, so we don't have to pre-bake it or anything. But what we are going to do, we're going to form flutes, but we're going to do it on the one that I made earlier. I made one earlier, it looks just like this, and I left it like this. I didn't flute it because I wanted to make a point, and the point is that it's much easier to make your ruffles, your little scallops, and they hold much better when the pie is baked if you do that when the pastry is cold. So what I recommend is you take the pastry at this point and either refrigerate it for about 45 minutes to make this all nice and cold, or you stick it in the freezer for about 6 minutes, maybe 7 minutes. You got to keep an eye on it. That'll get it nice and cold quicker. But let me put this one in and take the other one out. Hang on here. Okay, so here's the one I did earlier, and it's nice and cold. I've had it in the refrigerator for several hours. That's the same recipe, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I like to put flutes on, make our little flutes, and there's a couple little nuanced things here, so pay attention. And I'll walk you through them. And while I'm doing that to this, let me put this other one in the fridge and get that one cold. So watch what I do here. I rest my, and this is the other reason it's nice to firm up your dough, is because if you're doing what I'm doing now, and you have to knock the crust a little bit, you're not going to knock anything out of shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this one in here, and I'm going to take these two out here, and I'm going to press these two against my thumb, but I don't want to also press my thumb out because I want to keep those flutes inside as much as possible on that rim and slightly inside the pan. Because if you push those flutes way out here, it's not unusual that when you're baking the pie, the crust will actually collapse over the rim. And we don't want that to happen, do we? No. So let me show you what I mean. So, see how I'm pressing? And you can push far. You don't worry. If you see the dough split a little bit, don't worry about it. That's fine. Get a little flour on here. See what I'm doing? I'm pressing in. I'm not pressing out, though. If for some reason it sticks to your fingers a little bit, just put some flour on there. Do you have a good view of that on the camera, sweetie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any questions, let me know. I know I'm yakking away over here. What is your favorite type of, let's get a little chat going in the chat there. What is your favorite type of apple pie variation? I'd like to know. Just let Bev know in the chat there, and she can let me know. What's your favorite way to vary a apple pie? So anyway, that's that. Easy peasy, right? And we're left with these beautiful flutes sitting right on top of our rim, and that's just where we want them. So we're going to fill this with our filling in just a minute. But for the time being, say if I like to do these a day ahead of time or a morning ahead of time or whatever, I'll often stick them in the freezer if I have room. Freezer or refrigerator, either one. Just like that. If you're talking short term, like a few hours or a day or two, you really don't even have to cover it with plastic. Okay, so that's going in the freezer. Let's look at our filling. Let me just tidy up my hands here for a second. Sweetie, when you get those apple pie variations coming in, just let me know. I'd love to know what everyone is making or how they like to. And while she's looking for those, and I'm taking a mini break here, I'm going to have a...
And you have clean hands.
Yeah, I have clean hands. Now that I have clean hands, Bev just ran and got something for me.
I had a request to see the cherry.
Oh, someone wanted to see the, let me make sure my hands are nice and clean.
So Sue says that she loves the, what is it, the Gravenstein?
Oh, yes. Yeah, the Gravensteins, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah.
she uses boiled cider.
Sue says this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Sue.
Ooh, apple cranberry.
Apple cranberry, yeah.
I
Yeah, we'll
mentioned
talk
that.
about some of these variations when we're making the filling. And while you're sending more ideas in, I just wanted to show you this. This is our cherry one, which I love the look of this one. I put these little hash marks on it. These are 13 inches apart, and those come in handy because it gives you some reference. Like that pastry I just rolled, I knew I needed to make it 12 and a half, and if there's no ruler handy, I know it has to be just within those lines. These, for the pot pies I make, that's usually the size I make the crust for the pot pies. So beautiful, beautiful rolling pin.
That's the cherry.
The cherry one, right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me move this and...
Susan has a question. She says, how does the crimping work with the double crust?
How does what?
Crimping work with the double crust.
Okay, the crimping with the double crust is a little different. I don't have anything, let's see, I'm trying to think of a video I may have done which would show you that. But it's a little bit different. What you do is you roll your bottom, let's just say you have a bottom crust, you rolled your bottom pastry, you lay that in the pan, you just let those edges hang over. Okay, you don't flute them at that point. So you put your filling in there, then you lay your top crust on top of it, and you pinch those two together along the edge, and you leave, and then you trim it so you've got about I don't know, about a 1/2 inch to work with. And then after you pinch those two together, it's good to put some water down between those two. That way, you know, they'll stick together better. But then you'll do the same thing. Actually, you'll take and you'll, there's just more dough to work with. You'll take those two and you'll turn them under, just like we did. And then you'll go around. I would let it refrigerate for a while, again, to firm up that dough. And then you would crimp them the same way. Just gotta have to keep your knuckles, you know, off the dough so you don't crush it. I've seen people do it other ways too. Some people have some sort of a crimp they do like this. I don't do that particular one.
But you can also use the things that you use around the edge.
Yeah, it's a little more difficult. Bev is talking to me here.
With the wooden spoon?
Yeah, sometimes I'll use a wooden spoon to crimp around the edge, but usually I'll use something like this. I'll build that edge up and then go around and do something like that, and that's a good way to do it too. That works better with a single crust pie than with a double crust one, however. Okay, let's, any other variations of pie I should know about? If not, let's go ahead and make our filling.
Roseanne says that she loves a plain apple pie. She mixes Cortland apples with Honeycrisp and
Yeah.
one Granny Smith apple.
Yeah, Cortland's are good. Okay, so here are our apples. All right here. And right on top, you're going to see something that doesn't really look like an apple. And this, in my little teaser information there, where you signed up for this class, I said I would tell you my secret ingredient for making the best, for my favorite apple pie. And the secret ingredient is a pear. It's not an apple. I just think a pear mixed with apple, a pear or two, it is such a nice thing because it adds, not only does it add sort of a floral aroma and flavor, but it's just, they're so juicy. And that juice just, even though you don't need much, I mean, 1 or 2 pears in an apple pie goes a long way, but the flavor just complements the pears or apples so nicely. So that's my little secret ingredient. So here we have,
Oh, sorry.
okay,
Tracy says that she cooks the apples slightly and uses brown sugar flour and McGillicuddy's apple pie brandy.
oh, apple pie brandy, wow.
Yeah.
That sounds really good.
It does. And 5 to 7 different apples.
Oh, wow. That sounds great.
Oh, yeah.
Now, so this is my 8 cups of apples right here, sliced. We'll go back and talk about slicing. Well, let's just talk about slicing right now before we go any further. Let me get my cutting board. I'll just show you how I slice my apples. You know, everyone's got their own way of doing things, but I saved one out here to show you what I do. First thing I do is I remove the labels. That one was really stuck on there. So I take the top off, and then I take the bottom off, like so. And that gives me a natural place for my peeler to cut into. So at that point, after I've taken the top and bottom off, all I do is go like that, all the way around. Okay?
If you put the crust in the freezer the day before,
Yeah.
how long should it be pulled out before filling or baking?
You don't really have to take it out before, 5 minutes before. You don't really have to, there's really no concern because taking it out ahead of time. It'll bake just fine. It may add because it's cold, it'll add a few minutes to the baking time, but not much. Okay, so that was very simple, wasn't it? So I've got to take off the bottom and top because it gives me a nice logical bite area for this, my little peeler. And then what I'll do is I'll cut the apple into panels right around the core, okay? Like so. Now if you wanted to be really thorough, you could do something like that, you know, trim this up, use your little paring knife and trim this up like so. But okay, so let's cut those and I'll get rid of this stuff, and I'll show you how I slice them. So I cut my apples into panels like that. Then what I'll do is I'll take either my like utility knife like this one, or my paring knife, and I just go like that. And, you know, aim for about an eighth inch thick.
Okay, Karen wants to know, why did you peel the apples? There's so much nutritional value in the peel, and they add color.
Well, you have to love apple peel. A lot of people don't. I mean, it's true. That's where the nutrition is, and that's where the color is. But you know, it adds. It's a little bit unusual to keep it on there, and it can add some chewiness that people really aren't. A lot of people don't like. I happen to be one of them. So now the pear was different. The pear has such a soft skin that I left it on there. But I'm just not a big fan of it. But again, this is your favorite apple pie, right? So you can make this any way you want. And if you like apple skins, please leave them on there. I mean, that's great.
And aren't skins different from different types of apples?
Well, they will. The different apples are liable to have, you know, different texture skins. I think the Golden Delicious apple has a very tender skin.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how we slice the apples. So I've got 8 cups here, which is what we need for the pie that we're making. So you can see, and what I did was I mixed my apples up. I had like 3 Fujis in there. What else? I had a Honey Crisp. I've got a Granny Smith. And this is one thing I always encourage people to do, because people always want to know the best apple. Well, there really is no best apple. When I lived in New England for many, many years, if I could, I would try to get my hands on Northern Spies or Wine Sap. Those were really, really good apples. But those are hard to get outside of apple country. So most of us probably have to get what's in the grocery store, in the supermarket. So, you know, that's work with what's in the supermarket. And this is, you know, this is just a selection that was in the supermarket. But again, don't stress about apples. You know, to me, it's the whole idea about making an apple pie, or making pie period, is to de-stress. You know, do something on the weekend that you love doing. So the last thing you want to do is you know, stress about the apples. And the good thing about using a variety of apples too is that, you know, if one is a little bit, you know, lacking in juice or flavor, another one may have an abundance of it and make up for it. You know, so don't feel bad. You know, there several times during the season, I'll end up with 1 or 2 of this or that, and I'll mix them all, make an apple pie. I think it's the best way to do it, frankly.
I think that was Tracy that said she likes to use a lot of different.
That was Tracy who said that?
So, yes.
Yeah.
So she likes to use 6 or 7 different types. Ellen wants to know, if you're making a deep dish pie, how many more apples or cups of apples would you use? Well,
this is a deep dish pie. It's not my deepest dish pie, because, like I said, I have some Le Creuset and other pie pans that will hold 10, 11 cups of sliced apples. So you have to kind of experiment and figure out what's a comfortable amount, because when you're done putting them in the pan, typically you want them to mound. You don't want a ridiculous mound like that, but you do want them to mound on the top. Okay? So that's really impossible to say, because I have some really huge, I have pie pans that are that deep and, really, as round as this, really big pie pans too, and they'll hold a lot of apples. Now let's talk about things we can put, things that we're going to put in here in our filling. We want sugar, okay? Sugar's a nice thing to have because it sweetens things up. So what I have here, I gave you a range in your blueprint, in your template there. I said, maybe 1/3 to like 3/4 or 2/3 of a cup of sweetener on average. So that's what I have here. I have a 1/2 cup of sugar. Let me get my maple syrup out before I forget that I want to add some. Excuse me. Then we have, now brown sugar is good in an apple pie too. I like it a lot. The only thing with brown sugar though is the combination of brown sugar and cinnamon, it really tends to darken the apples. Sometimes it makes them look a little muddy. So I go a little bit easy on that when I do use brown sugar. That's our cinnamon, about a generous 1/2 teaspoon right there. You can use more or less. You could use other spices too. You could use nutmeg. There are a lot of my apple pies. I'll add nutmeg too. I have apple pies that I make with 5-spice powder. I mean, there's plenty of ways that you can mix it up. Staying pretty basic here. This is 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. That's just enough cornstarch to thicken this pie, so that's as much as I use. So let's mix those up. And we're going to add those to our fruit.
Sue wants to know, is this the apple pie recipe with the pear and different apples in your Pie Academy book? If not, can you give us the name of the apples again?
The apples, okay, I'm not sure which, this is really not exactly one or another in the Pie Academy book, but this one I had a mixture of, I think 3 Fuji, I think 1, and those were good sized Fuji too, maybe 1 Honey Crisp, maybe 1 Granny Smith, and then a pear. So depending on the size of the apples, that's about what you would need. Okay, so I added those in here. I'm going to start stirring with this, and then I'm going to add some maple syrup. Just a little bit to remind me of New Hampshire. That was about,
'tis the season.
yeah.
Fall.
Yeah, fall in New Hampshire. Nothing like fall in New England. And I think because everything pie at least usually tastes better with lemon zest. And you could add orange zest. I've done that before. Orange zest is wonderful.
Now, Roseanne wants to know, how do you prevent the gap between the apple pie filling and the crust?
Well, there is no gap. This one will have no gap at all. That's a little bit. There's a couple of ways you can do that. I'll send Roseanne a email about that, but it's kind
More
of
apples.
yeah, more apples. Yeah, remind me. Because we're getting towards the end here, and I want to get this all in the pan. But and make a note of that, sweetie, and I'll send Roseanne an email about that. Basically, one trick you can do is lay well, first of all, if you have this huge crust like this, you're never going to be able to get it all the way down. But sometimes, if it's just a little bit of a mound or a bulge that you want to take out of it, as soon as the pie comes out of the oven, if you lay a tea towel on it, let it sit for a minute, you can compress it just push it down to hit the filling until it reaches the filling. And if you're careful, you won't damage the crust. So let's put, I talked about add-ins. I'm going to put some golden raisins in here. I bought these the other day. I'm trying to use them up. But I think those will be good. And at this point, you get to add whatever you want. So let me get my pastry out. And when you have a lot of apples, this is really the only way to mix the filling. Clean your hands up, make sure they're good and clean, and then dive right in. And it makes it easier to mix it and also makes it easier to get in the pan. So let's get it in there. Yeah, you can see the grannies, can't you? And you can see the pear. And that looks pretty yummy, doesn't it? Okay, now one more thing, and I'm not even going to put this in the food processor because it's so easy to do. I'm just going to pull out some pre-made topping that I have. And if you pull that topping recipe out, you'll see that it's a really good buttery, oatmeal-y, walnutty topping. And it makes a lot. All of my topping recipes have always made a lot. No one ever says that a Ken Heydrich pie has too little brown sugar topping on it because I love it. This is about as much topping as it will make. And after I mix it in the food processor, you can take a quick look at it on your sheets if you have any question about it. But after I mix it in the food processor, I tend to spread it out on a tray like this. And if I'm going to use it right away, I'll just leave it on the tray like this. Now, you want to get it cold because it makes a nicer texture when it bakes if it goes on cold. So that's why I do it cold. Plus two, if you have leftover and it's cold like this, you can bag it right up and stick it in the freezer. If it's not cold first and you stick it in the bag and it goes in the refrigerator or the freezer, it tends to all clump together.
Use it on muffins.
Yeah, you can extras for muffins, for quick breads, all kinds of stuff. So this really goes on heavy. So we get a bunch on there, and then we start spreading it out like so.
Now, what about using Asian pears? They're crispier than apples or pears themselves.
Yeah, I've never tried that, but
I haven't either.
I'll have to try that. Okay, so now that we've got our topping on, let's talk about. See, I didn't use quite all of it. There's more right here. So I'll just let that go. I'll set that aside. And let me clean my hands. Now let's talk about baking it because there's a lot of mass there between the crust and the apple filling and the topping. This thing is quite thick. It's about a good 4 inches thick in the middle. So this is going to take a while to bake. And when I remember what I put on there on the sign-up page? I said I would say something about the one mistake, the one easily avoidable mistake that so many people make when they're baking an apple pie is they don't bake it long enough. I see that happen time and time again. So you have to be patient with it. We're going to start it at about 400 degrees. Then I like to start it out low in the oven because that really gets some heat quick right on the bottom there. And it helps to sort of seize and brown that bottom crust. So you want that. And after about, well, first of all, let's not forget this. It's gonna go on a baking sheet, like so. Oh, let me use this one. It's gonna go right on a baking sheet because pies leak. I don't care how good you are, pies leak. So what's gonna happen is 30, 40, 50 minutes into this pie baking, we're going to get juice. This stuff will fall off. A little butter will leak out of the pastry. So all these things are going to happen, and unless you have a rimmed baking sheet underneath it, it's going to make a mess in your oven.
With parchment.
Parchment, please use parchment. Get parchment from somewhere, and it keeps your life so much happier and easier. So you'll give it those first, say, half an hour at 400 degrees, and then turn it down to 375. After half an hour, check out the topping. If it's starting to get a little brown, you may want to cover it with a piece of foil. Now this one that I baked, I covered that with a foil about 30 minutes in. That foil was on there for most of the rest of the bake time, and it went a good, almost another hour beyond that until it was done. You know when it's done. Okay, so the foil will go on like this. You open the oven, you just pull the tray out, or pull the pan out, and then put this on there. Now, you'll know when it's done when you see juices coming out in a number of places. And those juices have to be thick, because unless they're thick, all you're getting is juice. You're not getting thick juice. The temperature inside the pie has to be hot enough to engage that thickener and that cornstarch. So you want to make sure that you see thick juice coming up in a number of different places. So you're looking for that. That's the most important thing that you're looking for. If you're not seeing juicy and bubbly, it's not done. No harm is going to come for this thing if it stays in the oven longer, longer than an hour. And like I said, it could go total an hour and a half. And if you keep this foil on top of it, you're not going to over brown it on the top, but you definitely want that thickener to take and those apples to be tender. Okay? Then you take it out, you put it on a rack, and you let it sit for a good hour or two before you even think about cutting into it. Now what I'm going to do is move this aside and cut into our other pie. Sweetie, you look very quizzical over there. Do you have a question for me?
Yeah, I was just waiting to hear from Sue.
Oh, okay.
She says, is putting it on the bottom only if the heating element is on the bottom?
Well, either way, whether the heating element is there or not, that tends to be, in most ovens, it tends to be the hottest part of the oven.
Okay.
The bottom and the top tend to be the hottest parts of the oven.
Okay.
Okay, let me grab my pie, and we'll cut a piece. Okay, let's dig right in. I'll get my plate. And take a real big piece right out of the middle. You can, I don't know if you can hear it, but I can hear that nice crisp crust crackling as I cut through it. Let me get my spatula.
Bobby says, did you lower the oven, or the original temperature of the oven after the first 30 minutes?
Yes, I lower it to 375. Okay, here it comes. Are you on the front camera, sweetie?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you switch?
Okay.
Okay. How's that look? Can you see over the edge of that plate? Let me tilt it for you a little bit. How's that look? So you can see, with this pie right here, to me the apples are a little bit too dark. I must have used a little bit too much brown sugar in the filling there. I mean, it tastes wonderful. It's just just sort of a preference for the coloring of the apples. Let's put some ice cream on there.
Roseanne wants to know why you don't like Pyrex glass pie pans.
I like Pyrex okay. It's just not my first. But I've used my Pyrex pans a lot, so yeah, I do actually like them, but they're not my first choice. Okay, let's throw some.
It might be because you have so many choices.
Okay, come on. All right, there you go. How's that?
Very nice.
Now, I know I always feel a little bit rude when I do this and eat in front of people, but they can watch me have a bite, okay? Let me see how it is. I'll be lucky if this whole thing doesn't go flying. Yep, that's apple pie, all right. Yeah, I nailed it. That's the way I like it. I made this one very similar to the one that we just made, and it's perfect, if you ask me. So, what else? Any other questions before we sign off? Went a little longer than I thought.
Beautiful pie. Let's see. Yummy.
Pie is a wonderful. I have a saying somewhere that pie is poetry that makes the world a better place, and it makes a wonderful gift for people, especially this time of year. If you know anybody who's, or maybe you know someone who's a little bit down about one thing or another, or just needs a little bit of a lift. A pie like this, a slice or a whole pie. People love getting pie they just love getting pie. I have a couple of fire stations in the area that I've kind of adopted, and whenever I have a lot of leftover stuff, I'll drop it by there, and those guys are so appreciative. So if you make an apple pie, or maybe make two of them, maybe have one to spare, and you can give it to somebody who could use a little bit of a lift.
Yeah, make them smile.
Make them smile.
Okay, so I have a question.
Okay.
Tina wants to know, she says, someone asked earlier about using a knife on the USA pan. How durable are they?
The USA pans, they hold up. The one I just, this one that I just cut into, I mean, is years old. The Gold Touch one is years old. I mean, it's not the pans that I'm worried about, frankly. It's your knives. So, because it'll really dull, so, be careful about the knife that you use on the pan. It's the knife you need to be worrying about because you'll dull the edge. Try to get kind of it's better to use some kind of a beater knife for cutting pie with.
Okay, is cornstarch better than clear gel for use as a thickener?
I don't use clear gel, not that up on it, so I can't really say. I use cornstarch. I have it around all the time. I don't necessarily know if one is better or the other. I do know that the equivalent amount of flour you would use for that 2 tablespoons of cornstarch we used in our pie would be about 4. Usually you need half as much cornstarch as you would flour. So if you were making that pie and you wanted to thicken it with flour, you'd use about 3.5 tablespoons, maybe 4, excuse me, 4 of flour.
And Sue says, is this apple recipe in the download you sent this morning? She said she printed it, but it's not there.
It's not a single recipe per se. It's part of the instructions, the overall blueprint though. If you look through the blueprint, Sue, you'll see that I reference each of the ingredients and say approximately how much to use. So it's not written as a recipe per se, it's sort of written as guidelines.
Oh, okay.
So is that about it?
And making sure I've got all of the questions here.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you all coming today. This was a lot of fun. We do a lot of classes at the Pie Academy, and I thought it'd be fun to do a free one for a change. So if you haven't had a chance to experience one of our other classes, you got a little taste, pun intended, with this class. So great to have you here. I hope to see you again, and you take care. We're going to wrap things up now. Okay, bye-bye.